walls. You've often described how at some point we won't be able to perceive those realities because they'll be too incompatible with our vibration. Mechanically speaking, are there certain specific deciding factors that determine when something of a very different vibration effectively vanishes from somebody's reality? And if so, could you name some of those factors?
One of the factors is whether or not it's still relevant for someone to perceive someone else that may be exhibiting a very different vibration. They may still contain within the overall formula of what they are energetically as a pattern indications that they still need to perceive those kinds of attributes in another person for some reason of their own. It may be for the purpose of assisting that person. It may be for the purpose of getting a reflection from that person that they need in their own life. There can be many different factors that may allow someone to still retain the ability to perceive another, even though their vibrations may be very far apart.
Okay. And in connection to Halloween and the anniversary of the destruction of Atlantis, would a future Halloween be a pivotal point for our current timeline?
Yes, it will be, especially with the coming of the hybrids, and especially as humanity opens up to its spiritual side more strongly. We will, to some degree, talk about this in the upcoming transmission in your Las Vegas area.
Okay. This person is writing that they live in Israel and they're in a very challenging experience right now. And they're aware of the many realities and scenarios and how the importance of their reaction to them. But they want to know, how should they be reacting to these scenarios? What is my state of being to them? And do you have any messages for the state of Israel?
All we can say at the moment is to be cautious, to be aware that there may be certain things that are being done for reasons that are not necessarily absolutely clear. There may be hidden agendas in terms of why something is done the way it has been done. Agendas that would allow the world to see that area in a very different light that's not necessarily positive. So the idea is to be aware and to be cautious of how you proceed to interact and to engage so that you can retain what you might call higher ground, ethically, energetically, morally, as you move forward to attain the balance that you seek. We are not allowed to say much about this, but this is what we are allowed to say. Some of the things that have been done specifically to get an overreaction so that things change in the eyes of the world in a way that is not necessarily a positive framing. We would suggest that you do not fall into that trap. Also, again, staying on course with the formula will help each individual who understands how to use it properly and precisely, and will give you the insight necessary to navigate yourselves and guide yourselves as you move forward in this situation and circumstance. But simply be cautious and understand why certain things were done specifically to get a reaction that would not necessarily be in your favor should you act on them too forcefully, too broadly. That is all we are allowed to say at this time.
Um, Along those lines of what you're saying, it seems like in business, there's certain areas of business where people feel it's okay to have very personal reactions to behavior. And then there's maybe another philosophy, which is that you always want to be in a centered space and not reacting similar to how high schoolers or junior high schoolers react to each other. In other words, the more balanced that you remain, even in business scenarios, when you're making decisions, is along the lines of what you're expressing, that you're going to make better choices if you're not reactive to the negative or immature behaviors of others. Is this accurate?
To some degree, yes, especially when the actions that have been taken have been specifically designed to get an overreaction.
Okay. Yeah, because that is one of the great benefits of what you've shared with us, that if you come from a centered space when you make decisions about how to respond, you will have a better outcome than if you just follow the normal ways that people can get reactive and angry and all of those things.
Yes.
Um, what is the single most important idea, in your perspective, advice that you can give us today to help humanity go down a path of peace, prosperity, and shared technology for all humanity to evolve and shift with love and prosperity and avoid self-annihilation?
Again, we think you understand the answer if you are familiar with our information at all, because the answer is always on that level to follow the formula and take the actions in your physical reality that are reflective of following the formula, to be a living example to others of the choices they can make that are more positive, constructive, and thus to be of service to all humanity by being a living example of following the formula and creating the reality that you prefer. There is nothing that we can share with you that is more powerful than that as a navigational tool.
Yes, and we really are very grateful for it. It really works. The more precisely you follow it, the more amazing things you can experience. It's
Yes,
wonderful.
again, this is why we share it with you. We know what it can do. All you have to do is prove it to yourself by applying it.
Okay, and this is about near-death experiences.
Yes,
Many NDEs are very similar and yet distinctively unique.
yes,
I have listened to many Christians describe their NDEs and how they end up meeting Jesus. And when Muslims die, do they meet Mohammed? Do Buddhists meet Buddha? Do Jews meet Moses? I mean, it's the belief that this person has is that when you die, you get what you expect. Is that correct?
in many cases, yes, that will happen, depending upon the level of devoutness you have to that particular religion and the expectations you do have in crossing over. Now, many of those encounters may or may not actually be what you would recognize as the authentic being. It might be a spirit guide presenting itself that way because of the expectation, rather than it literally being the being known as whatever name you wish to insert there. However, sometimes it can be that being, and in many cases, depending upon the being itself that one expects to see, even if it's a spirit guide, that could still be an aspect of that being. But it allows the spirit guide to represent it in that way because there is something about the connection that the spirit guide has to the person crossing over that will make it easier for that person to relate. Because sometimes meeting the being itself, the authentic being, may sometimes be a little overwhelming for many people that expect to see the being in a certain context. And that context may not necessarily be the way that being authentically presents itself. So they may, in a sense, allow another being to represent just the facet of the authentic being that the one crossing over expects to see, even though that may be a relatively limited version of them.
Closed contact. But when you speak about our early history, it seems ETs and humans interacted openly then. When exactly did the ETs leave us and hence close our contact? And why did they leave?
We have never left, but the idea of observation as opposed to interaction became necessary when you reach a certain point in your evolution as a species to allow you the opportunity to grow, to discover, to self-empower without relying on ETs. The idea is then to see if you would evolve to a point where once again contact could occur after you had become more independent, more self-sufficient.
And in keeping with the Halloween spirit, after Atlantis fell, you have said that Noah was given instructions by ETs to build his boat. How many animals were on it, and how did they get along? And if Noah had not done so, does this mean that many of our current animals today would not exist?
First of all, there was more than one being that you are collectively referring to as Noah. There were many such vehicles that departed and went in different directions. This is why you have flood stories in almost every culture on your planet that are very similar to one another about a being in some kind of water vehicle that managed to survive the flood, carrying families and animals with them. So this happened in many different directions, and all of the different so-called Noahs, of course, who had different names, all landed in different areas. So the idea is, yes, had that not happened, there would be certain animals that wouldn't be among you today. But the idea is that there was a disbursement of many different kinds of species into different areas on your planet. And this was done by many different individuals who created many different kinds of crafts.
So I guess our version of it today is where we save all the DNA from all the different species so that if something cataclysmic happens.
Yes. And in some cases, some of the animals were, in fact, nothing more than DNA at the time.
Um, Despite increasingly negative global behavior, people in my reality are raising their vibrations all the time. And it's so fun to see. I know this is a function of the splitting prism effect, but how might I experience further splitting despite conflict elsewhere growing?
Follow the formula. That is why we give it to you all. It simplifies things. It contains everything you need. It navigates you in the direction you need to go and constantly raises your frequency. Follow it as precisely as you can. That's all you need to do.
Okay, and are the hybrid children interested in our celebration of Halloween? That might seems exciting to be able to celebrate that with them somehow to this person.
In some senses, although it would not necessarily be experienced by them in the same way, since they can actually communicate with the spirits of the dead, literally directly. So a celebration of the idea of spirit is how they would mostly perceive it. Communication with and celebration of life with spirit is how they would perceive and express it.
And did the Greys have any equivalent to Halloween in their culture?
Well, remember that they used to be human, and
Right.
therefore, long ago, yes, they had something similar in their history, but not after they became the Greys, not after they mutated, no.
Okay. And at the Sedona event, you told a questioner that the entities encountered on any type of DMT enhanced experience were an astral version of the Greys. Does this mean that anyone taking that substance prior to the hybridization agenda would have encountered other beings or would have not encountered any beings at all?
Well, first of all, it takes a very specific dosage to encounter them because they exist at a very specific frequency that is commensurate with that dosage. Secondly, no one was taking DMT in the way that you are talking about it before the idea of the hybridization agenda. This was long ago that it began. Even though there were people experiencing certain forms of altering substances in nature, there was no specific dosage that anyone took that allowed them to encounter the astral grays at that specific frequency until such time as the grays showed up in your reality and became part of your archetypal consciousness.
Okay, can you explain what a black hole is and what's inside of it?
It depends on the type of black hole. Some of them can be gateways to other universes. Some of them can be concentrations of information. It depends on the type of black hole.
Okay. And we call the idea of spaceships ships or UFOs or flying saucers. What does your civilization call the vehicles you travel around the universe in?
Shakiri.
And at the recent Sedona weekend, you said your ship was above Bell Rock at an elevation of 1,000 feet. A few seconds later, it descended down to 700. Were any people able to see it, or was it invisible to everyone? And if it was invisible, do you use some kind of a cloaking technology?
We simply alter our frequency that is usually beyond the range of your senses. So it's not exactly a cloak in the way that you mean it technologically. It is simply a frequency that most of you cannot perceive because we are shifted into a slightly altered reality.
And so were there people able to see your ship when you did that drop down to 700 feet, or was it um,
There are those who might have been able to see it, but they were not present in the area.
and you said that there is an ET ship above Cathedral Rock in Sedona. I went there and sensed Arcturian energy. Can you tell us if there's an Arcturian ship above Cathedral Rock, and if not them, who is it?
There is Arcturus energy in the area, but they don't have ships as you understand the concept. It's more a projection of consciousness. So yes, they are present energetically, but it's not exactly a ship as you understand these things. Sirius is also involved, so are Pleiadians, and many others in the Sedona area.
Being or a shy higher being that gets exhibited in each of their respective physical projections as such.
There may be higher beings that are more assertive or reserved. We would not necessarily call them dominant or shy. Those are more human personality traits. But there may be reasons for one to express itself a little bit more strongly, or one to hold itself in reserve as a overall quality of that particular higher mind, that particular soul. There are unique factors, but they're not exactly like the personality constructs of a physical mind. However, one of the most common and, of course, absolutely necessarily expressed overarching qualities is one of the expression of unconditional love, no matter what other qualifications might go along with it.
And what is the purpose in experiencing meaning to life? If this is all a dream state, why do we need to be here and just exist?
You don't just exist. You experience, you grow, you change, you discover. It adds to your soul's experience. It adds to the idea of creation as it expands. Because again, as we have said, the structure of existence never changes. The way creation expands is through the idea of different experiences, different relationships, and different perspectives of it by you and your experience in the realm that you're in, such as physical reality. Calling it just a dream is not an understanding of the idea and the power behind experiencing the dream in the way that you have constructed it. It gives you an opportunity to experience something you cannot experience in spirit in a timeless state. And that has great value and great power to it. So it's not just about existing. It's about creating, acting, being, not just existing.
So when you talked about the neutral needs,
Yes.
are those across the board for all life, or just for this realm? The idea of creative expression is one of the neutral needs that we have.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering if, consciousness itself is wired with that same basic need to have creative expression, and that's why there are so many things to experience now because of that drive.
Yes, it is in a sense built into consciousness because everyone is a different expression of all that is, and therefore has its own need to express itself as a reflection. Now, the other things, of course, are more determined by the physical reality that you experience or the level of dimension that you're experiencing. Some things are not necessary in other dimensions. But the idea of creative expression is a very fundamental concept to your very existence, to your very nature as an expression, as a reflection of all that is.
So if you went back 800,000 human years ago and looked at the universe.
Yes, well, first of all, you'd be very cold because 800,000 years ago, the Earth was entirely encased in ice.
Okay.
Scientists call it a frozen snowball.
Oh, okay, let's go back to when human beings were here on the planet. Okay. And
There were human beings at the time, but they existed in a very narrow band of climate.
I guess what I'm getting at is if you were to look at the universe as a whole, and all of the different forms of manifestation and
One moment,
drama,
one moment, one moment. There has been an error in translation. 800 million years ago, the Earth was a frozen snowball before humanity existed. Nevertheless, there have been ice ages on your planet where humanity has existed in a narrow band of climate. We apologize for the mistranslation.
I guess the question is more, is there a complexification where things get more and more complex in the overall area of existence? If you look at the human timeline and see how different the universe or the multiverse looks, since consciousness is always creating more and more and more, right? That's what it does. It creates.
Yes, when you talk about different levels of complexity, however, you must understand that that's a relative thing. So, to the idea of the human mind 800,000 years ago, there were certain things that would represent complexity to them or simplicity to them that are different from the things that represent those same concepts to you in your so-called modern age. So it can be just as complex, but not necessarily expressed in the same way.
Um, the concept of as above, then so below, does that refer to one above and we are the below, or is there a below that is below us that makes us above?
The idea is that physical reality is vibrationally lower as you understand these things, vibrationally below spirit vibration. Spirit vibration is the above. Physical reality experience is the lower vibration and thus is below. Below that are simply your own projections of portions of your own consciousness that reflect to you things like belief systems, especially the idea of fear-based and negative ones, which are of a very low vibration. However, the idea that these things exist in the sub and unconscious mind as beliefs is actually paradoxical, because all you're getting is a reflection of belowness, making you feel like the idea of the subconscious and unconscious are, so to speak, below you, but they're actually vibrationally above you because they're closer to the idea of the non-physical higher mind. So you can have a reflection that you've created that is seemingly below you, but physical reality is the lowest vibration authentically compared to spirit. Now, there are other realities that are more dense than yours. You can consider those vibrationally to be below your experience of reality. But on your world, the vibrations of physical reality are the lowest that you actually authentically go, even though you may create the illusions of something even lower.